You're listening to an exclusive production from Valio. Betrayal Always Lurks. The Sting of Suspicion. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Doubt. Awareness before defense. There is a quiet weight that comes before certainty, a stillness that presses against the chest, insisting that something is off even when nothing has yet been proven. It arrives subtly, often as a flicker at the edge of perception, a hesitation in a voice, a pause too long, a glance that lingers a moment too long. These are the shadows of doubt. They are the signals we often ignore because we want to believe in the comfort of trust, in the simplicity of human decency. But to navigate life with clarity, to move with purpose in a world where intentions are not always transparent, we must first learn to recognize them. Doubt is not weakness. It is an instrument of awareness. It is the first whisper that reminds us to look closer, to question, to discern. It is the difference between walking blindly and stepping with intention. Those who succeed in maintaining control over their lives are rarely those who never doubt. They are those who respect doubt, study it, and allow it to sharpen their perception. To acknowledge the shadow is to arm oneself against its sting. The mind is an environment of competing voices, and doubt thrives where certainty is demanded. When someone presents themselves with smooth charm, offering smiles that seem too carefully measured, or assurances that feel too rehearsed, the instinctive mind senses misalignment. Often, these instincts are brushed aside in favor of politeness, of hope, or of the desire to avoid confrontation. Yet ignoring them is a luxury few can afford. In relationships, in business, in every interaction where stakes are high, failing to notice these signals can be the difference between security and betrayal. Suspicion is not simply paranoia. It is observation honed by attention. It requires presence, an awareness that the world is not always what it seems. It begins with noticing inconsistencies, small discrepancies that might seem irrelevant in isolation but collectively form a pattern. A friend who forgets promises frequently, a colleague who offers help that comes with a hidden price, a partner who masks discomfort with excessive charm. These are not coincidences. They are the early markers of potential betrayal. Recognizing them does not condemn you to mistrust, but it equips you to move with intelligence rather than innocence. Consider how subtle betrayal can be. It rarely appears fully formed, openly aggressive, or immediately recognizable. It hides in omissions, in the small misdirections, in the slight bending of truth that seems insignificant until examined in retrospect. Betrayal begins as a shadow, and shadows require keen eyes to detect. The first step, therefore, is always awareness. To move forward without it is to invite risk. To move forward with it is to navigate life like one who walks through fog with a lantern, able to see the shapes before they strike. Your perception is the foundation of defense. It is not enough to rely on loyalty, promises, or appearances. Humans are complex, capable of both immense generosity and subtle duplicity. Awareness does not isolate, it empowers. It teaches you to read between lines, to notice hesitation and urgency, to discern motivation from action. It trains the mind to separate the weight of intention from the noise of circumstance. And once this awareness is cultivated, the sting of betrayal loses much of its power. You are not blind to it, but neither are you trapped by it. Doubt, when understood, serves multiple purposes. It is the early alarm system that alerts you to danger, the tool that clarifies perception, and the mirror that reflects your own boundaries. When suspicion is present, it asks, "What do you truly know?" It forces you to question assumptions, to verify information, to observe behavior over time rather than relying solely on words. In this sense, doubt is not an enemy, it is a guide. Ignoring it leaves you exposed. Honoring it allows you to move strategically. Yet, cultivating this awareness demands discipline. It is tempting to dismiss discomfort, to explain away anomalies with kindness or rationalization. We want to see the best in people because the alternative, constant vigilance, can feel exhausting. But without vigilance, trust becomes a gamble, and life stakes are rarely low. Each interaction carries risk, each relationship potential for disappointment or worse. Recognizing this is not cynicism, it is clarity. It is the recognition that safety is neither given nor guaranteed, and that awareness is the currency with which we purchase security. Awareness begins in the smallest actions. Notice the cadence of speech, the alignment between words and behavior. Watch for subtle shifts in energy when accountability is required. Observe reactions when requests are made or expectations are set. Patterns will emerge if you are attentive. These patterns are rarely definitive, but they are predictive. They are the breadcrumbs that lead you to understanding before harm can occur. Ignoring them is to wander blindly. Following them is to move with purpose. Doubt also teaches patience. Impulsive reactions often serve the betrayer more than the betrayed. Acting without observation, without analysis, allows manipulation to take root. Waiting, watching, listening, these are acts of power. They slow the impulse to trust fully or to judge hastily. They create space for clarity to develop, for insights to surface. They are the preparation for decisive, informed action rather than reactive defensiveness. The shadow of doubt is not meant to dominate your interactions, but to inform them. It is a quiet, steady companion that reminds you, not everything is as it appears, and the truth is often layered. It invites you to look deeper, to consider motives, to assess risks before committing energy, time, or trust. In embracing this shadow, you are not choosing isolation. You are choosing discernment. You are learning to navigate a world where not all intentions are declared, and where human behavior is often more complex than words can convey. Suspicion, carefully cultivated, also protects emotional and financial energy. It prevents overextension, prevents exploitation, and prevents unnecessary disappointment. When you anticipate the possibility of betrayal, you are free to allocate trust wisely, to invest in relationships and endeavors that merit it, and to maintain boundaries that safeguard your autonomy. Awareness does not create distance for its own sake. It creates precision. It ensures that connection is intentional rather than accidental, that generosity is measured rather than blind, and that engagement is strategic rather than naive. Finally, the shadow of doubt teaches self-respect. To notice, to question, to hold space for observation is to honor your own standards and values. It affirms that your time, your energy, and your resources are precious, and that they deserve protection. It is not the presence of mistrust that defines your interactions, but the disciplined management of it. You are neither cynical nor unkind. You are vigilant, measured, and capable of discerning truth from illusion. As you move through life, know that doubt will arise naturally. It will surface in whispers, in gut feelings, in subtle inconsistencies. To ignore it is to risk vulnerability. To embrace it is to cultivate clarity, strategy, and resilience. The shadow of doubt is not a threat. It is a teacher. It is the first step in mastering relationships, influence, and self-protection. It offers a lens through which the world can be observed with precision, allowing action to be intentional and trust to be granted selectively. Take this awareness with you, and let it shape the way you move, speak, and observe. Let it remind you that vigilance is not hostility but wisdom, that discernment is not suspicion but empowerment, and that the mind trained to recognize shadows will navigate the world with a confidence that is quiet, steady, and unshakable. In this practice, the sting of betrayal loses its suddenness. It becomes manageable, foreseeable, and preventable. And in that space, you discover the freedom that comes from knowing that while not all intentions can be controlled, your response, your perception, and your boundaries always remain yours to command. Awareness is the first defense, and vigilance is its companion. Together, they allow you to engage with the world fully, but cautiously, never naive, always informed, always in command of your own energy and destiny. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Betrayal. Understanding Hidden Motives. Betrayal is never simple. It is a quiet architecture built in shadows, assembled piece by piece until its presence is undeniable, yet always leaving room for doubt. To understand it, one must look beyond surface actions, beyond the words spoken, and into the space between intention and execution. Every act of betrayal begins long before it is revealed, often hidden beneath a mask of trust, charm, or obligation. The skill lies in perceiving the architecture before the collapse. To navigate life effectively, one must learn to read these hidden structures, to recognize the motives that drive them, and to understand the patterns that make them repeatable. At the heart of betrayal lies human complexity. People rarely act in black and white. Intentions are layered, desires tangled, and decisions often influenced by a mix of fear, ambition, insecurity, and self-interest. When someone betrays, it is not always because they are inherently malicious. Sometimes it is because their needs, goals, or ego outweigh the loyalty they owe. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior, but it allows you to approach it strategically, rather than reactively. It shifts the focus from moral judgment to observation, from blame to awareness. It is a lens through which human behavior becomes predictable, rather than chaotic. Motives for betrayal can be subtle or blatant, conscious or unconscious. Some seek power, influence, or control. They measure relationships not by connection or loyalty, but by utility and advantage. Others act from fear, preemptively striking to protect themselves from imagined threats. Some betray for pleasure, manipulating and deceiving as an end in itself. Recognizing which category a person occupies requires careful attention. The tone of their voice when promises are broken, the patterns in their behavior over time, the way they frame their own actions when confronted. These indicators are rarely singular, they are cumulative. Patterns emerge when observation is sustained, and it is through these patterns that betrayal becomes discernible. Manipulation is often a key component. It is the tool of those who betray, employed to mask intent, to bend perception, or to create dependence. Subtle flattery, feigned vulnerability, or orchestrated crises are not accidental. They are designed to shift attention away from hidden agendas. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial. When you recognize manipulation, you can separate the action from the emotion it provokes. You can see through the performance without becoming ensnared in its narrative. Awareness transforms instinct into strategy, and suspicion into a protective instrument rather than a source of anxiety. Deception thrives where transparency is assumed. People who take trust for granted are most vulnerable. Betrayal often starts with small concessions, minor compromises, or seemingly harmless lies. Each step tests boundaries, measuring how far the other will allow intrusion or exploitation. Over time, the cumulative effect becomes significant. Recognizing this incremental process is vital. Betrayal is rarely sudden. It is a slow erosion, and by the time it becomes overt, the signs were present from the beginning. Understanding this allows you to respond early, before loss or damage becomes unavoidable. The psychology of betrayal also involves projection. Many who betray are skilled at attributing motives to others that align with their own desires. They suggest that others are untrustworthy, self-serving, or deceitful, often to justify their actions or to manipulate perception. This deflection is subtle yet powerful. It shifts scrutiny away from their behavior and onto the character of those around them. Observing these dynamics is part of the skill set required for discernment. It teaches you to examine actions, not words, and to weigh behavior against pattern rather than rhetoric. Betrayal is inherently relational. It exists only where trust, expectation, or dependency is present. Understanding its anatomy requires mapping the dynamics between individuals, the flow of power, the allocation of responsibility, the unspoken agreements that form the foundation of interaction. These structures are where vulnerability is built, and they are where manipulation finds its entry point. By analyzing these dynamics, you gain insight into where the risks are greatest and where caution is most needed. It is in this understanding that prevention becomes possible, and where empowerment replaces helplessness. Equally important is the recognition of emotional leverage. Those who betray often exploit sensitivity, attachment, and desire for approval. They understand that the human heart is prone to hope, to forgiveness, to overlooking minor inconsistencies. Betrayal leverages these tendencies, magnifying the effect of deception. Awareness of this mechanism allows you to protect your emotional energy. It does not require you to harden yourself completely, but it enables you to maintain clarity, to observe without being consumed, and to act without losing control. Patterns of betrayal are predictable when studied. They are rarely random. Similar circumstances, repeated behaviors, and familiar rationalizations often signal the approach of deceit. Those who are observant can anticipate risk based on previous occurrences. They learn to recognize the sequence. The initial charm, the subtle boundary testing, the small omissions, the self-serving narrative. By understanding these sequences, you gain foresight. You see betrayal not as a surprise, but as a possibility that can be managed, mitigated, or avoided entirely. Developing insight into hidden motives also strengthens intuition. Intuition is not mystical. It is accumulated observation, pattern recognition, and experience synthesized into instinctive understanding. It is the mind recognizing what the eyes alone cannot see. Trusting this sense, once it is honed through careful attention, is a powerful tool. It allows for rapid assessment of character, enabling decisions to be made with both caution and confidence. Ignoring it, or dismissing it as paranoia, invites unnecessary vulnerability. Self-awareness is another critical factor. Understanding betrayal in others requires knowing your own patterns, vulnerabilities, and responses. Those who are unaware of their own attachment, dependency, or blind spots are more easily manipulated. Reflection allows you to see where risk is greatest in your own life, and to fortify those areas. It ensures that discernment is not solely outward-looking, but balanced with internal clarity. In this way, the study of betrayal becomes a mirror, revealing both external threats and internal resilience. Betrayal leaves a trace, even when hidden. It manifests in tension, hesitation, inconsistency, and avoidance. Learning to read these traces equips you to respond with precision rather than reaction. You do not have to assume ill intent at every turn, but you do cultivate the ability to identify when loyalty may be compromised. This skill is not about suspicion for its own sake. It is about preparedness, foresight, and strategic positioning. Ultimately, understanding the anatomy of betrayal is an act of empowerment. It transforms vulnerability into insight, chaos into structure, and fear into actionable awareness. By recognizing motives, identifying patterns, and observing behavior, you shift from being a passive participant in life's unpredictability to an active navigator. You learn that trust is not granted blindly, that relationships require vigilance, and that protection does not require isolation. This knowledge allows you to operate with clarity, confidence, and intentionality, even in environments where deception is possible. The human mind is capable of both generosity and duplicity. Recognizing this duality is essential. To deny the potential for betrayal is to surrender control. To understand it is to reclaim power. You do not become hardened or cynical. You become aware, discerning, and deliberate. You learn to move through the world with eyes open, intuition sharpened, and energy protected. Awareness of hidden motives is not a burden. It is a tool. It is a compass that directs attention, guides decisions, and preserves integrity. In embracing this understanding, you are prepared. You approach relationships and interactions with a balance of openness and vigilance. You grant trust where it is earned, but you measure it against behavior, patterns, and outcomes. You observe without assumption, act without impulse, and protect without alienation. The anatomy of betrayal is no longer a threat looming unexpectedly. It is a system to be understood, analyzed, and navigated with confidence. By seeing clearly, by understanding motives beneath the surface, You cultivate the strength to maintain composure in the face of potential deception. You move with strategy, preserve your energy, and act from a place of informed awareness. This mastery of perception is the foundation upon which trust, influence, and security can be built. It allows you to engage with the world fully, without naivety, and without surrendering your power to those who would exploit it. Awareness of hidden motives is the lens through which life becomes navigable. By studying the anatomy of betrayal, you ensure that when deception arises, it does so on your terms, not as a surprise, not as a wound, but as an event that can be anticipated, understood, and managed. Knowledge is the shield, observation is the sword, and clarity is the domain over which you maintain control. Chapter 3. Fear as a compass. Using suspicion to protect yourself. Fear is often painted as a weakness, a shadow to be banished, something to overcome in the pursuit of courage. Yet fear is not the enemy. It is a signal, a guide, a compass pointing toward the places where caution is needed, where attention must be sharpened, and where action must be deliberate. The moments when fear rises are the moments when the mind is alert, the senses attuned to potential risk, and the body prepared to respond. Learning to interpret fear rather than suppress it transforms it from a source of paralysis into a source of protection. Suspicion and intuition are siblings, born from the same awareness that fear activates. When an instinct tells you something is off, when a gut feeling gnaws at certainty, that sensation is not arbitrary. It is the mind registering patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle cues that may not yet be obvious. Fear is its voice. The key lies in learning to listen without judgment, to honor the message without surrendering to panic, and to translate that alertness into measured, strategic action. It is important to distinguish between paranoia and informed caution. Paranoia is a restless, unanchored fear that magnifies every possibility without evidence. It traps the mind in endless what-ifs, depletes emotional energy, and prevents decisive action. Informed caution, on the other hand, arises from observation, from pattern recognition, and from a history of discernment. It is fear directed by reason, sharpened by experience, and tempered by reflection. When guided wisely, it becomes a tool rather than a burden. Using fear as a compass begins with noticing its patterns. When does it arise? Is it triggered by a specific type of situation, a certain behavior in others, or the violation of boundaries? Fear often identifies vulnerabilities before the conscious mind does. It warns when trust might be misplaced, when intentions are ambiguous, or when risk is present. Recognizing these triggers allows you to act in advance, to fortify defenses, and to allocate energy where it is needed most. Fear is not a call to retreat. It is a signal to approach with strategy. Fear also sharpens perception. When the mind is attuned to potential danger, it notices discrepancies that might otherwise be overlooked. Subtle changes in tone, fleeting expressions, or small inconsistencies in behavior become evident. These observations are the early warning system, the preliminary map of where caution should be exercised. By acknowledging and respecting these signals, you prevent oversight, minimize vulnerability, and gain the advantage of foresight. Awareness before action becomes not just preferable but essential. Yet fear alone is not sufficient. It requires translation into action. This is where discernment and strategy intersect. A gut feeling may alert you to risk, but it is analysis and observation that provide context. Question, watch, and verify. Collect information, compare behavior over time, and observe the alignment between words and deeds. Fear tells you that attention is required. Strategy tells you how to act without unnecessary exposure or confrontation. Together, they form a framework of protection that is both subtle and effective. Suspicion guided by fear also preserves personal energy. Emotional and mental resources are finite, and investing them indiscriminately is costly. Fear highlights where vigilance is warranted, allowing attention to be focused on relationships, decisions, and environments that carry higher stakes. By honoring this internal signal, you avoid wasteful engagement, reduce susceptibility to manipulation, and maintain clarity of judgment. Fear becomes not a source of stress, but a marker for prioritization and preservation. It is crucial to act with measured restraint. Fear does not demand immediate reaction. It encourages observation. Impulsive responses often play into the hands of those who would manipulate or betray. Waiting, gathering information, and assessing the situation enables a response that is deliberate, targeted, and effective. Controlled action, informed by both instinct and analysis, is far more powerful than reaction driven by unprocessed fear. It transforms vulnerability into strategy. Learning to trust your internal compass requires experience. The first impulses may seem overreaching or unwarranted. Doubt may arise, questioning whether fear is justified. The practice lies in recording outcomes, noting when alerts were accurate, and observing patterns of intuition. Over time, discernment strengthens. Fear is no longer a source of anxiety, but a reliable tool that aligns perception with reality, guiding decisions with precision and care. Fear also serves as a mirror to personal boundaries. It often arises when those boundaries are at risk, whether emotional, financial, or physical. Listening to these signals allows you to assert yourself, to enforce limits, and to navigate interactions with integrity. Boundaries become not just statements of preference, but strategic lines of defense informed by internal guidance. Fear does not indicate weakness. It illuminates the edges of personal sovereignty. In professional, personal, and social contexts, fear as a compass offers an advantage. When others act with hidden motives, when opportunities are layered with risk, or when alliances are fragile, the instinctive caution that fear provides is invaluable. It allows you to anticipate challenges, negotiate safely, and engage selectively. By integrating fear into decision-making, you move with the confidence of someone who is aware of the terrain, capable of adapting, and unwilling to surrender agency. Emotional mastery is central to this process. Fear must be observed without being internalized as shame or self-doubt. Recognizing fear as a guide separates the message from the emotion. Techniques such as measured breathing, reflection, and journaling can aid in processing the signal without overreaction. By maintaining clarity, you ensure that fear informs action rather than dictates it, that insight guides behavior rather than instinct alone. The interplay between fear and trust is delicate. To navigate relationships effectively, fear must be balanced with discernment. It does not advocate for isolation or suspicion of all. It signals where focus is warranted, where engagement requires caution, and where observation must precede commitment. This balance allows selective trust, protecting personal integrity while remaining open to meaningful connection. Fear becomes a compass pointing not toward avoidance, but toward prudent engagement. Consider scenarios where fear has the potential to prevent loss. A business partner who consistently offers ambiguous assurances, a friend whose actions do not match their words, a decision that feels impulsive. These are areas where fear provides insight. It warns against overextension, alerts to potential manipulation, and allows preparation for contingencies. Acting on these signals strategically transforms fear from a source of tension into a tool of empowerment. Fear also teaches resilience. Repeated exposure to risk, paired with thoughtful responses, strengthens both emotional and cognitive faculties. Over time, the mind becomes adept at parsing signals, evaluating threat levels, and responding appropriately. Each experience sharpens judgment, allowing future decisions to be made with confidence and precision. Fear, in this way, contributes to growth rather than limitation. Ultimately, using suspicion as a guide is not about living in constant worry. It is about recognizing that the world contains complexity, that people carry motives unseen, and that outcomes are rarely guaranteed. It is about honoring instincts, cultivating observation, and integrating insight into action. It is about transforming the natural protective mechanism of fear into a conscious strategy for living deliberately, safely, and effectively. By the end of this practice, fear ceases to be a burden and becomes a reliable instrument of clarity. It informs, alerts, and protects. It guides attention where it is needed, preserves energy where it is precious, and allows engagement without compromise. Fear as a compass ensures that trust is allocated wisely, that action is deliberate, and that boundaries are respected. It transforms instinct into intelligence, vulnerability into foresight, and uncertainty into preparedness. Every moment of hesitation, every pang of doubt, and every flash of caution is an opportunity to strengthen strategy. By observing and responding consciously, you harness the power of fear rather than being dominated by it. You move through a world filled with unpredictability with eyes open, mind alert, and heart aligned. Fear, once understood and integrated, becomes the instrument through which discernment, self-protection, and purposeful action are achieved. In embracing this approach, you discover freedom, not the freedom of naivety, but the freedom of confidence, clarity, and command. Fear guides without controlling. Suspicion informs without isolating. Awareness sharpens without paralyzing. In this way, the compass of caution leads you steadily, intentionally, and securely, allowing every step to be both cautious and confident. Chapter 4. Recognizing patterns, detecting repeated signs of deception. Deception rarely strikes without rhythm. It is seldom a single, isolated act. Betrayal leaves traces, small and often subtle, that repeat across time and circumstance. To recognize these patterns is to step out of reaction and into strategy, to move from vulnerability into foresight. Life presents these cues constantly, and those who learn to notice them gain a decisive advantage. Patterns are the language of intention, and by reading them carefully, you begin to see the hidden architecture of behavior. The first step in pattern recognition is observation without judgment. It is easy to react emotionally to perceived slights or inconsistencies, to write them off as coincidence, or to let irritation cloud discernment. But effective observation is patient, detached, and precise. You notice actions as they occur, recording them internally, and begin to connect events over time. Each small gesture, repeated omission, or unexplained change becomes a piece of a larger puzzle, waiting for assembly. This process transforms ambiguity into clarity. Repetition is a hallmark of human behavior. People act according to internal logic, comfort zones, and self-interest. When deception is present, it follows recognizable forms. Perhaps promises are consistently broken, explanations frequently shift, or responsibility is repeatedly deflected. Each of these is a signal, not necessarily definitive in isolation, but meaningful when seen as part of a sequence. By tracking these repetitions, you move beyond gut instinct into informed understanding. The pattern emerges from accumulation, not assumption. Timing is another key element. Deceptive behavior often follows a rhythm. Actions that seem coincidental may reveal themselves as deliberate when placed in context. A sudden generosity that coincides with a request for favor, a flurry of communication immediately preceding a critical decision, or a pattern of avoidance whenever accountability arises. These are not random occurrences. Recognizing timing patterns strengthens discernment, allowing anticipation rather than surprise. Awareness of rhythm is awareness of intent. Subtlety is where deception often hides. Most betrayals are not overt or dramatic at first. They appear as minor inconsistencies, slight exaggerations, or selective omissions. These subtleties are easier to miss when one is distracted or overly trusting. Pattern recognition requires focus, a sustained attention to detail over time. It is the act of connecting small discrepancies into a coherent whole, understanding that the sum of minor deviations can reveal an underlying truth. By seeing the subtle repeated acts, the shadow of betrayal becomes visible before damage occurs. Behavioral clustering provides insight into character. Repeated patterns across different contexts reveal priorities, tendencies, and likely responses. Someone who repeatedly manipulates, deceives, or deflects in professional settings may display similar tendencies in personal interactions. Observing across multiple dimensions allows for deeper understanding and reduces the risk of misinterpretation. Patterns are not confined to single circumstances. They weave through the fabric of daily life, and those who notice them can anticipate outcomes with greater confidence. Language is often a key indicator. Listen closely to phrasing, consistency, and shifts in tone. People who are deceptive may contradict themselves, employ evasive language, or subtly shift narratives over time. Words become markers when studied carefully. They indicate comfort or discomfort, honesty or omission, intent or deflection. When combined with observation of behavior, language patterns form a map of reliability and risk. Attention to these markers transforms intuition into actionable insight. Body language and energy are equally telling. Even when words are controlled, micro-expressions, gestures, and posture reveal truth. Repetition of certain behaviors, avoiding eye contact at critical moments, fidgeting when answering questions, or mirroring your reactions inconsistently, can indicate discomfort or concealment. These repeated signals, when viewed in sequence, become patterns that guide discernment. Recognizing physical and energetic rhythms allows you to detect deception even when it is carefully concealed. Patterns also emerge through emotional impact. Betrayal often leaves subtle traces of tension, unease, or fatigue. If interactions consistently leave you unsettled, drained, or uncertain, these feelings may reflect recurring behavioral patterns rather than personal sensitivity. Emotional resonance is a barometer of alignment between perception and reality. Repeated emotional responses are signals, evidence that attention is warranted. They provide an internal guide, confirming observations and highlighting areas for closer inspection. Documentation is a practical tool in pattern recognition. Keeping a record of events, promises, or interactions over time allows patterns to become unmistakable. Writing down occurrences, noting inconsistencies, and tracking responses transforms memory into evidence. The repetition becomes measurable, undeniable, and actionable. This practice is not about mistrust for its own sake. It is about creating clarity, establishing accountability, and strengthening the ability to respond effectively when deception surfaces. Recognizing patterns requires patience. It is not immediate. The subtleties of human behavior unfold slowly, often masked by charm, distraction, or manipulation. Rushing to judgment can obscure understanding, while patient observation allows context to reveal itself. The mind trained in pattern recognition develops the ability to discern not only what is happening, but why it is happening and what is likely to follow. This insight creates strategic advantage and preserves personal and emotional energy. Equally important is the integration of pattern recognition into decision-making. Observing repeated signs is only valuable when it informs action. It allows for careful allocation of trust, calculated engagement, and the creation of protective boundaries. Recognizing patterns transforms fear and suspicion into structured intelligence, providing the clarity needed to act with confidence. Decisions become informed by evidence, not reaction, allowing relationships and endeavors to be navigated with foresight. Patterns also teach humility and self-awareness. By noticing how deception operates in others, you reflect on your own tendencies, blind spots, and vulnerabilities. Recognition of repeated dynamics in your own life, where you may have overlooked cues, ignored red flags, or trusted indiscriminately, strengthens discernment. It encourages reflection, growth, and the refinement of personal standards. Awareness of patterns in both self and others builds resilience and strategic acuity. Understanding deception through patterns is a profound act of empowerment. It shifts the balance from vulnerability to informed agency. You are no longer subject to surprise or manipulation, but capable of anticipating risk and responding with precision. Patterns reveal motives, predict behavior, and highlight areas where vigilance is required. By internalizing these signals, you move with intention rather than reaction, with strategy rather than emotion. Awareness becomes not just a skill, but a way of navigating the world. Ultimately, recognizing patterns is about cultivating vision. It is seeing beyond immediate appearances, connecting actions over time, and interpreting subtle signals before they escalate into harm. It is the practice of being present, attentive, and deliberate, transforming intuition into clarity, suspicion into insight, and experience into foresight. Each observed repetition strengthens understanding, hones judgment, and fortifies the ability to protect oneself without closing off to connection or opportunity. The mastery of pattern recognition is also a mastery of timing. Knowing when to act, when to withhold, and when to wait allows for intervention at the most effective moment. Patterns provide both warning and guidance, illuminating the path between complacency and overreaction. They allow engagement that is measured, calculated, and purposeful, preserving both trust and personal sovereignty. In cultivating this awareness, you discover freedom to interact without naivety, freedom to invest without overexposure, and freedom to respond without fear. The repetition of signs, when recognized and understood, transforms uncertainty into clarity. You no longer stumble into betrayal. You anticipate it, assess it, and protect against it. Pattern recognition is the foundation upon which vigilance, strategy, and discernment are built. It ensures that each decision is informed, each action deliberate, and each relationship navigated with precision. By the end of this practice, you see clearly, observe consistently, and interpret wisely. You recognize deception not as a mysterious force, but as a pattern to be studied, understood, and managed. Each repeated action becomes a signal, each inconsistency a guide, each emotional resonance a compass. In this awareness lies both protection and empowerment. Patterns are not simply behaviors to watch. They are the language of intention, and fluency in that language is the key to navigating a world where trust is the ultimate gamble. Chapter 5. Emotional mastery amid distrust, maintaining clarity when tension arises. Suspicion, doubt, and the awareness of potential betrayal are not merely intellectual exercises. They are emotional challenges. The mind can observe, analyze, and record, but the heart responds differently. Emotions flare when trust is questioned, when intentions are unclear, or when boundaries are tested. Without mastery over these reactions, awareness becomes clouded, decisions are compromised, and vulnerability increases. Emotional mastery is not the suppression of feeling. It is the regulation, understanding, and strategic application of emotion, particularly when tension rises. When distrust surfaces, the first instinct is often defensive. The body tightens, thoughts race, and the mind conjures worst-case scenarios. It is a natural reaction, a vestige of survival mechanisms honed through experience. However, unbridled emotional responses can amplify risk rather than mitigate it. Anger, fear, or frustration can distort perception, misinterpret intent, and lead to actions that invite greater compromise. Mastery begins with recognition, noticing the surge of emotion without immediately acting on it. Observation is the first act of control. Breathing and physical awareness are practical starting points. In moments of tension, the body responds before the mind can intervene. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, and the adrenal system prepares for fight or flight. By consciously regulating breath, by noticing the sensations in the body, you create a buffer between impulse and action. This space allows reflection, enabling emotion to inform rather than dictate response. Calm does not mean inaction. It means clarity in the face of provocation. Self-reflection is equally critical. Ask yourself, why does this situation provoke me? Is the reaction aligned with the reality of the circumstances, Or is it amplified by past experience, unresolved emotions, or fear of loss? Emotional triggers often arise from patterns within ourselves as much as from the actions of others. By identifying these internal patterns, you separate personal projection from external threat, gaining a clearer view of both intent and risk. Emotional intelligence in this context becomes an instrument of discernment. Effective response under tension requires balance between empathy and assertiveness. Understanding that others act from their motives, some hidden, some conflicting, does not mean condoning behavior. It means observing it objectively, assessing risk, and responding strategically. Empathy allows you to read motives, predict behavior, and navigate interactions with finesse. Assertiveness ensures that your boundaries are maintained, that trust is not granted indiscriminately, and that your energy remains protected. Both are essential in the management of tense situations. Language and tone are vital tools in emotional mastery. When confronting suspicion, the words chosen can escalate conflict or preserve clarity. Neutral, precise, and measured language allows the situation to be navigated without unnecessary agitation. Avoid reactive statements, accusations, or emotionally charged commentary that cloud intent or provoke defensiveness. Clarity of expression reinforces clarity of perception. It allows control over the narrative and maintains authority over personal boundaries. Observation remains a cornerstone. Emotions can cloud judgment, making subtle cues easy to miss. Maintaining emotional discipline ensures that you continue to notice inconsistencies, patterns, and behavioral signals even when tension rises. The mind, trained to observe despite emotional stimulus, becomes a resilient tool. Each moment of emotional control reinforces the capacity to discern, to anticipate, and to respond effectively. Mastery is not instantaneous. It is cultivated through consistent practice and conscious attention. Resilience is strengthened through preparation. Anticipate scenarios that might provoke stress, disappointment, or betrayal. Consider responses in advance, identify boundaries, and visualize strategies for maintaining composure. The mind and body respond more effectively to real challenges when rehearsed in controlled environments. Emotional mastery is proactive, not reactive. It prepares you to navigate tension without surrendering clarity or control. Another critical aspect is perspective. Emotional reactions often amplify immediacy, making situations feel urgent or catastrophic. Stepping back, even briefly, allows assessment from a wider lens. Consider motives, consequences, and history. Ask, is this a one-time anomaly, a pattern emerging, or a projection of fear? Perspective transforms raw emotion into actionable insight, ensuring that responses are proportionate and strategic. It separates genuine threat from imagined or exaggerated risk. Accountability plays a role as well. When maintaining emotional control, ensure that actions align with values and long-term objectives. Responding impulsively to perceived betrayal can create collateral consequences, compromising relationships, reputation, or personal integrity. Emotional mastery is measured against outcomes, not just feelings. Each decision is evaluated for its alignment with strategy, protection, and long-term stability. Emotions inform action, they do not override it. Mindfulness techniques, whether internal dialogue, journaling, or reflection, can reinforce mastery. Tracking reactions, noting triggers, and evaluating responses after the fact enhances awareness. Emotional responses become data rather than dictates, providing insight into both self and others. Over time, mindfulness strengthens the ability to maintain clarity even when external circumstances provoke stress or uncertainty. It transforms instinctive reaction into deliberate response. Forgiveness and detachment are tools in the emotional toolkit, not for the sake of overlooking deception or weakness, but to prevent internal turmoil from dictating decisions. Holding on to anger or fear can cloud judgment and drain energy. By practicing detachment, You preserve emotional clarity, ensuring that every interaction is approached with strategy, not resentment. Emotional freedom allows observation to remain sharp, intuition to remain precise, and decision-making to remain grounded. Consistency is crucial. Emotional mastery is not occasional, it is habitual. Each moment of tension is an opportunity to practice, to observe, and to refine response. By responding consistently rather than reactively, you cultivate a reputation for composure, strategic awareness, and measured judgment. This consistency also strengthens internal confidence, reinforcing trust in your own ability to navigate complexity without being overwhelmed by emotion. Emotional mastery amid distrust is ultimately a practice of sovereignty. It asserts that, while you cannot control the actions of others, you can control your responses. You can protect your boundaries, preserve your energy, and maintain clarity of perception. You can act strategically, speak intentionally, and move with deliberate authority, even when faced with deception or ambiguity. Mastery transforms the chaos of emotion into a framework for insight, foresight, and protection. By the end of this practice, tension is no longer paralyzing. Suspicion becomes an instrument rather than a burden. Doubt becomes data rather than distraction, and emotional responses are harnessed rather than feared. You navigate relationships, negotiations, and challenges with composure, awareness, and strategy. Emotional mastery does not eliminate risk. It ensures that when risk arises, your response is deliberate, measured, and aligned with your long-term objectives. In this way, emotional clarity becomes a shield and a guide. It allows discernment to flourish, vigilance to remain steady, and trust to be allocated wisely. The storms of tension no longer dictate your actions. Instead, you move through them with awareness, confidence, and control. Emotional mastery is the foundation upon which every subsequent strategy, observation, pattern recognition, and boundary enforcement is built. It ensures that clarity remains unshaken, even when circumstances demand vigilance, resilience, and discernment. Chapter 6. The Cost of Blind Trust. When naivety invites loss. Trust is a currency we spend daily, often without realizing its weight. It is a necessary ingredient in relationships, collaboration, and life's most meaningful exchanges. Yet, trust given indiscriminately carries a price. Blind trust, untempered by discernment, exposes the heart, mind, and resources to risk. It allows others to act without accountability, creates vulnerability to deception, and invites consequences that could have been avoided with careful observation and strategic foresight. Understanding the cost of blind trust is not cynicism. It is a guide to self-preservation. Blind trust often begins innocuously. A smile, a confident tone, or a familiar face can disarm vigilance. When someone presents as reliable or aligns superficially with our expectations, it is tempting to accept appearances at face value. The mind shortcuts analysis in favor of ease, comfort, or emotional connection. Over time, however, patterns of inconsistency, omission, or subtle manipulation accumulate. By the time consequences manifest, the foundation of trust has already been eroded. Awareness at each stage is essential to prevent loss before it becomes unavoidable. The cost of blind trust is multifaceted. Financially, it can result in misallocation of resources, exploitation, or outright theft. Emotionally, it can leave a sense of betrayal, disappointment, or diminished self-esteem. Professionally, it can compromise projects, reputations, or networks. Even socially, blind trust can allow toxic influence or manipulation to gain footholds in personal life. Recognizing these potential costs motivates vigilance and underscores the importance of measured engagement. Trust is valuable, but not unlimited. One of the most insidious aspects of blind trust is that it often blinds the giver to subtle warning signs. Minor inconsistencies, small contradictions, or fleeting unease are dismissed, rationalized, or ignored. Over time, these overlooked signals accumulate into larger, more tangible consequences. Patterns that were initially detectable become undeniable, but by then, the damage is often underway. The lesson is simple. Attentiveness is a form of protection. Ignoring small cues is a risk. Observing them consistently is empowerment. Understanding the motives of others is crucial in allocating trust wisely. People act according to their priorities, interests, and desires, not necessarily according to your expectations. Without awareness of hidden motives, trust is a gift without foundation. Observing behavior over time, noting consistency between words and actions, and assessing alignment with values provides a clearer picture of who is deserving of confidence. Blind trust ignores these realities, placing the giver at a disadvantage and the recipient in a position of unearned influence. Boundaries are another critical aspect. Blind trust often ignores limits, allowing others to overstep, manipulate, or take advantage. Those who establish clear, firm boundaries create a framework within which trust can exist safely. Boundaries do not signify suspicion. They signify clarity, self-respect, and awareness of potential consequences. By defining acceptable behavior and asserting expectations, trust becomes a conscious decision rather than a naive assumption. The consequences of blind trust are amplified when combined with emotional attachment. Attachment intensifies expectation, softens vigilance, and biases perception toward optimism. This can make deception or negligence more damaging because it operates within a framework of emotional investment. Recognizing this interplay allows for deliberate calibration. Trust may be given, but it is monitored. Openness is offered, but not unconditionally. Emotional intelligence guides the allocation of confidence and protects against overexposure. Patterns of past experience often reveal the cost of naivety. Reflecting on prior instances where trust was given too freely illuminates vulnerabilities. Perhaps certain behaviors were ignored, certain warnings dismissed, or intuition overridden. These reflections are not sources of guilt. They are data. They inform future interactions, strengthen discernment, and refine strategies for engagement. Awareness of past missteps prevents repetition, allowing trust to be granted selectively and safely. Risk assessment is essential. Not every situation warrants full confidence, nor does every relationship justify complete openness. Evaluating the stakes, potential outcomes, and reliability of others transforms trust into a measured choice rather than an assumption. It enables you to engage fully where appropriate, while protecting against exposure where risk is elevated. Blind trust, by contrast, neglects this calculation, leaving the individual vulnerable to avoidable consequences. Accountability is intertwined with trust. When trust is extended blindly, the absence of accountability becomes apparent only after loss has occurred. Strategic trust incorporates mechanisms for verification, feedback, and observation. It creates a system where responsibility is clear, promises are trackable, and deviations from expected behavior are noticeable. Without these structures, trust becomes a liability rather than a foundation, and the cost of misjudgment escalates. Blind trust also hinders personal growth. When confidence is given without discernment, learning opportunities are lost. Each misstep, each risk unassessed, is a chance to cultivate awareness, judgment, and strategic thinking. Failing to apply discernment prevents development of the skills necessary for navigating complex social, professional, and financial landscapes. By understanding the cost of naive trust, one sharpens insight, strengthens resilience, and cultivates self-reliance. Emotional consequences can be profound. Betrayal erodes not just confidence in others, but also confidence in oneself. The realization that trust was extended unwisely can lead to doubt, second-guessing, and hesitation in future relationships. Recognizing this potential outcome highlights the importance of selective trust. By being deliberate, measured, and observant, you preserve both self-respect and clarity, minimizing emotional fallout and maintaining strategic composure. Overconfidence is a hidden danger. Believing that intuition or goodwill alone can safeguard trust creates vulnerability. While instinct is powerful, it must be reinforced with observation, pattern recognition, and boundary setting. Over-reliance on intuition without corroborating evidence risks misjudgment, creating openings for exploitation. Strategic trust balances insight with evidence, instinct with observation, and generosity with caution. The cost of blind trust can be mitigated but not ignored. Awareness, observation, and strategic engagement form the foundation of protection. Cultivating discernment does not preclude connection, it enhances it. It ensures that relationships, collaborations, and commitments are built on integrity, reliability, and mutual accountability. Trust becomes a tool, not a vulnerability. The individual who masters this balance engages fully with the world while maintaining sovereignty over self, resources, and energy. Ultimately, blind trust carries a tangible price: loss, disappointment, and exposure to manipulation. Recognizing this cost empowers careful decision-making. Trust, when granted selectively, becomes a conduit for meaningful connection, strategic alliances, and productive collaboration. It is no longer a gamble, but a conscious, calculated act. Awareness transforms vulnerability into foresight, naivety into strategy, and exposure into controlled engagement. By the end of this understanding, trust is no longer an act of surrender, but a deliberate choice. You allocate confidence with intention, monitor consistency with vigilance, and protect personal integrity with unwavering awareness. Blind trust ceases to dominate your actions, and discernment becomes your default mode. In this practice, freedom emerges, not from suspicion alone, but from clarity, observation, and the knowledge that your engagement with the world is intentional, empowered, and strategically sound. Chapter 7. Strategic Boundaries. Protecting yourself without isolation. Boundaries are not walls. They are lines of clarity, markers of intention, and instruments of preservation. They define where you end and another begins, where engagement is safe, and where vigilance must be maintained. In a world where trust is constantly tested, boundaries allow you to operate with freedom and authority without surrendering yourself to every influence, every demand, or every manipulation. Strategic boundaries are the bridge between protection and connection, ensuring that safety does not come at the expense of engagement. Establishing boundaries begins with self-knowledge. You must understand what is essential, non-negotiable, and aligned with your values. What behavior or circumstance triggers discomfort, frustration, or mistrust? Where does generosity become exploitation? Where does openness become vulnerability? By identifying these points, you create a framework that is clear, actionable, and rooted in personal integrity. Boundaries without self-awareness are arbitrary. Boundaries with awareness are purposeful and protective. Clarity in communication is critical. Boundaries lose their strength when they are implied, ambiguous, or assumed. Explicit articulation, without aggression, ensures that others understand the limits, expectations, and consequences of crossing them. Language that is firm yet respectful communicates authority while preserving relationships. It signals that you are observant, intentional, and not to be taken lightly. Consistency in enforcing boundaries reinforces their credibility and effectiveness. Boundaries are flexible, but not negotiable in principle. Situations may require adaptation, but the underlying values and protections must remain intact. Flexibility allows for negotiation, compromise, and collaboration, while preserving core integrity. Those who operate without flexibility may isolate themselves unnecessarily. Those without firmness invite repeated violations. Strategic boundaries balance adaptability with consistency, ensuring both protection and engagement are sustained. Observation is key in boundary management. People test limits, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes deliberately. Noticing how others respond to boundaries, how they respect or challenge them, provides insight into character and intention. Patterns emerge. Those who repeatedly push limits may be opportunistic, manipulative, or unreliable. Those who respect boundaries demonstrate reliability and integrity. Observation allows you to calibrate engagement, allocating trust and resources with precision. Boundaries are also defensive in nature. They prevent overextension of energy, time, and resources. Overcommitment is often a result of weak boundaries, leaving you vulnerable to exploitation and depletion. By enforcing limits, you maintain control over priorities, relationships, and obligations. Strategic allocation of energy ensures that investment is proportional to return, that engagement serves purpose rather than obligation, and that personal sovereignty remains intact. Emotional boundaries are as crucial as physical or practical ones. Emotional overexposure invites manipulation, fosters dependence, and can cloud judgment. Maintaining emotional clarity ensures that decisions remain grounded in observation rather than sentiment alone. Emotional boundaries involve understanding when to invest, when to detach, and when to maintain measured involvement. They protect the mind and heart without severing necessary connections. Conflict is inevitable when boundaries are enforced. Some will resist, challenge, or resent limitations. Strategic response requires calm observation, measured communication, and when necessary, firmness. Maintaining composure prevents escalation, preserves authority, and demonstrates that boundaries are deliberate, not reactive. Those who respect boundaries will adapt. Those who do not reveal themselves through their responses, providing additional data for discernment. Boundaries also reinforce trust. When clearly communicated and consistently maintained, they provide a framework within which reliable relationships flourish. Others understand expectations, and the risks of overreach are mitigated. Trust becomes earned and maintained within the context of defined limits. This is a more sustainable model than blind reliance, as it integrates awareness, accountability, and mutual respect. Strategic boundaries extend to resources as well. Financial, intellectual, and temporal assets require protection. Clear rules about access, accountability, and responsibility reduce vulnerability to misuse or manipulation. Boundaries in these areas are not signs of suspicion. They are expressions of stewardship, ensuring that investment of time, energy, or capital is preserved and utilized effectively. Isolation is a common fear when establishing boundaries, yet it is unnecessary. Boundaries do not equate to withdrawal. They define the space within which engagement occurs safely. They allow connection to be meaningful, deliberate, and respectful rather than reckless or exploitative. By enforcing limits without closing off, you maintain relationships that are both functional and aligned with your values. Boundaries create freedom, not loneliness. Boundary setting is reinforced through consistency and consequence. Repeated enforcement demonstrates commitment to principles and reduces the likelihood of repeated violations. Consequences are not punitive for the sake of power. They are practical demonstrations that boundaries are operative and meaningful. Over time, consistent enforcement cultivates respect, clarifies expectations, and protects both resources and integrity. Monitoring and recalibration are ongoing. As situations evolve, as people change, and as your own priorities shift, boundaries must be reviewed and adjusted. Reassessment ensures that protection remains relevant, engagement remains aligned, and energy is preserved. Boundaries are living tools, adaptable yet anchored in principle, capable of responding to changing circumstances without compromising sovereignty. Education and self-discipline enhance boundary effectiveness. Recognizing personal vulnerabilities, emotional triggers, and patterns of overextension enables proactive management. Awareness of manipulative strategies and deceptive behavior informs enforcement and adjustment. Boundaries are strongest when coupled with knowledge, observation, and emotional clarity. They are not static rules but dynamic instruments of strategy. The ultimate benefit of strategic boundaries is empowerment. They allow action without overexposure, engagement without exploitation, and connection without surrender. Boundaries transform vulnerability into authority, uncertainty into control, and exposure into deliberate participation. By maintaining boundaries, you navigate the world with precision, protect what is yours, and engage meaningfully with those who respect your limits. At the core, strategic boundaries are an expression of self-respect and discernment. They reflect awareness of risk, clarity of intention, and commitment to integrity. They do not close the door, they define the doorway. They do not isolate, they clarify the space in which trust, reliability, and meaningful engagement can flourish. Boundaries are both shield and guide, protecting what is valuable while enabling deliberate interaction. By the end of this practice, boundaries are no longer uncomfortable limitations, but instruments of sovereignty. They allow you to move through complex relationships and uncertain environments with confidence, clarity, and control. They preserve energy, protect resources, and enhance strategic judgment. With boundaries in place, you can engage fully without compromising safety and act decisively without fear of overexposure. Strategic boundaries are the architecture of personal freedom, safeguarding what matters most while leaving space for meaningful connection and deliberate influence. Chapter 8. Reclaiming Personal Power. Regaining autonomy in risky environments. Power is not something given lightly, and in complex, unpredictable environments, it is often chipped away quietly through subtle manipulation, unnoticed obligations, or unexamined trust. Reclaiming personal power is not about asserting dominance over others. It is about restoring sovereignty over your choices, your time, and your energy. It is the process of recognizing where influence has been ceded, assessing what has been compromised, and deliberately taking back control. True power begins with awareness, grows through strategic action, and solidifies through consistent boundary enforcement. The first step is acknowledgement. It requires an unflinching look at situations where your agency has been diminished. Perhaps decisions were made on your behalf, resources were diverted without consultation, or emotional investment was leveraged by others to gain advantage. Awareness of these dynamics is the foundation of reclamation. Without recognition, power cannot be restored because its absence remains invisible. Facing reality with clarity, no matter how uncomfortable, is the initial act of sovereignty. Observation provides insight into where and how influence has been lost. Patterns of behavior, repeated breaches of trust, and consistent exploitation reveal the mechanisms through which personal power has been eroded. By cataloging these patterns, you identify the leverage others have exercised over you, whether intentional or inadvertent. Understanding the process allows you to anticipate tactics, mitigate risk, and reclaim authority over the spaces in which you operate. Strategic detachment is often necessary. Reclaiming power may require stepping back from relationships, commitments, or environments where control has been undermined. Detachment does not mean disengagement from responsibility. It means assessing involvement with awareness and refusing to allow external pressures to dictate your choices. It is a deliberate repositioning that prioritizes autonomy and preserves energy for decisive action. Decision-making is central to empowerment. Every choice you make reinforces or diminishes personal power. In environments where manipulation or deception is present, deliberate, informed decisions reclaim control. Gather information, weigh options, and consider long-term consequences. Do not act impulsively in reaction to external pressures. Power is solidified through intentionality, not chaos. By choosing deliberately, you define the terms of your engagement, asserting authority over your own path. Self-reliance strengthens resilience. Personal power is rooted in the ability to meet needs independently, to solve problems without excessive dependence, and to trust judgment informed by observation and experience. Developing skills, knowledge, and resourcefulness reduces vulnerability to exploitation and positions you to act decisively when challenges arise. Reclaiming power is as much about building capacity as it is about removing obstacles. Boundaries, revisited and reinforced, are instrumental in this process. Those who have ceded influence often did so through the gradual erosion of limits. Reestablishing clear boundaries, physical, emotional, and practical, signals that your autonomy is non-negotiable. Boundaries define the operational space in which power is exercised safely. They are declarations of intent, tools for protection, and instruments for reclaiming authority in relationships and environments that may have previously constrained you. Awareness of leverage is critical. Recognize the areas where others hold influence over you: financial dependency, emotional investment, or social obligations. By understanding these dynamics, you can develop strategies to regain equilibrium. Power is restored not by confrontation alone, but by neutralizing leverage, redistributing influence, and asserting control over the aspects of life that matter most. Strategic alliances can enhance reclamation. Power does not exist in isolation. It is exercised in relation to others. Aligning with trustworthy, reliable individuals provides support, insight, and reinforcement. However, alliances must be chosen deliberately, with boundaries and expectations clearly defined. Collaboration strengthens personal power when it is mutually respectful, intentional, and protective, rather than reactive or exploitative. Emotional intelligence is the backbone of reclaimed authority. Understanding your emotional responses, triggers, and vulnerabilities allows for measured engagement and prevents others from exploiting weaknesses. Emotional clarity ensures that actions are deliberate rather than reactive, decisions are informed rather than impulsive, and confidence is genuine rather than performative. Mastery of emotion consolidates autonomy by aligning internal state with external strategy. Reclaiming power also involves reclaiming narrative. The stories we tell ourselves about our limitations, past mistakes, or obligations can subtly undermine authority. By consciously reframing experiences, recognizing lessons learned, and emphasizing capacity over limitation, you reinforce agency. Narrative shapes perception, which in turn shapes action. Controlling the internal narrative strengthens external influence, creating a feedback loop that reinforces sovereignty. Practice reinforces mastery. Power, once ceded, cannot always be reclaimed instantly. It is rebuilt incrementally through consistent action, reinforced boundaries, and deliberate engagement. Each choice, each assertion, each moment of observation and reflection contributes to the re-establishment of authority. Consistency signals to yourself and to others that autonomy is operative, and it reduces the likelihood of future erosion. Risk assessment is an ongoing necessity. Even when power is reclaimed, environments remain unpredictable. Strategic vigilance ensures that regained authority is maintained rather than assumed. Monitoring patterns of behavior, assessing potential threats, and adapting responses allows power to be exercised effectively without overextension. Autonomy thrives in an environment of informed awareness. Reclaiming personal power is ultimately a holistic practice. It integrates observation, discernment, emotional clarity, strategic action, and consistent boundary enforcement. It requires patience, reflection, and intentionality. Power is not asserted through dominance alone. It is cultivated through self-mastery, deliberate choice, and the capacity to act with precision even under pressure. Sovereignty is maintained when internal authority aligns with external behavior. The final dimension of reclamation is freedom. Autonomy allows engagement on your terms, protects energy and resources, and enables confident navigation of complex relationships. Power reclaimed is power that cannot be taken without deliberate consent. It is the ability to act strategically, to invest wisely, and to connect meaningfully without compromise. Sovereignty emerges from clarity, strength, and self-trust, not from fear or aggression. By the end of this process, personal power is no longer an abstract ideal but a tangible reality. Decisions are informed, boundaries are respected, and engagement occurs from a place of authority. Awareness replaces uncertainty, strategy replaces vulnerability, and autonomy becomes operative in every domain of life. Reclaiming personal power is not about controlling others. It is about mastering yourself, your environment, and the choices that define your path. It is the foundation for protection, growth, and deliberate, empowered living. Chapter 9. Aligning caution with purpose. Focusing energy on what truly matters. Caution, when applied indiscriminately, can become paralysis. Vigilance without direction drains energy, obscures priorities, and leaves potential unfulfilled. The key to strategic awareness is aligning caution with purpose, ensuring that attention, effort, and concern are reserved for areas of real consequence rather than scattered across imagined threats. When focus is deliberate, suspicion becomes a tool for protection and growth rather than a burden that limits action. Purpose provides the lens through which caution is measured. Not every risk warrants scrutiny, and not every situation demands protective energy. Begin by defining what truly matters, your goals, values, and non-negotiables. What is worth defending, investing in, or monitoring closely? What can be allowed to unfold with minimal interference? By clarifying priorities, you allocate vigilance where it yields tangible benefits, and conserve energy where consequences are negligible. Caution without discernment is reactive. Caution with purpose is strategic. Observing potential threats or inconsistencies is valuable, but only when it informs decisions aligned with your objectives. Focused vigilance allows for action that is both deliberate and impactful. Energy is not wasted chasing minor anomalies or irrelevant distractions. It is concentrated where it reinforces protection, growth, and long-term security. Assessment of risk becomes a practical exercise. Not all patterns, suspicions, or inconsistencies are equally significant. Evaluate the probability of harm, the magnitude of potential loss, and the degree to which engagement can influence outcomes. Prioritizing threats according to these factors ensures that attention is proportional to consequence. This method transforms anxiety into actionable intelligence, creating clarity amidst uncertainty. Boundaries intersect with purposeful caution. By defining what is essential to protect, you naturally establish limits that shield resources, energy, and emotional stability. Boundaries focus attention on critical areas and reduce unnecessary exposure. They prevent overextension, preserve autonomy, and reinforce the framework within which strategic vigilance operates. In effect, boundaries act as filters, allowing you to apply caution selectively and effectively. Pattern recognition remains central. While vigilance is necessary, it should be directed toward meaningful cues rather than every anomaly. Focus on recurring behaviors, repeated inconsistencies, and critical deviations from established norms. When patterns align with areas of high priority or high risk, attention is warranted. When they appear in inconsequential contexts, they may be noted but not overemphasized. This prioritization preserves energy and ensures that caution is applied where it matters most. Emotional discipline supports purposeful vigilance. Fear, frustration, or anxiety can distort perception, amplifying minor threats and creating unnecessary stress. Emotional clarity allows for measured assessment, ensuring that energy is directed in proportion to actual risk rather than perceived danger. By regulating emotional response, you maintain focus, preserve judgment, and enhance the precision of strategic action. Time and resources are finite. Purposeful caution involves deliberate allocation. Where should attention be invested, and where should it be withheld? which relationships, commitments, or endeavors require scrutiny, and which can be trusted to proceed with minimal monitoring. Allocating energy strategically ensures that vigilance strengthens outcomes rather than detracting from them. Efficiency and caution is as important as effectiveness. Trust is a variable in this equation. Not all relationships, situations, or environments require constant oversight. Distinguish between areas where reliability can be assumed and those where vigilance is warranted. This does not mean naivety. It means applying discernment to maximize focus. Trust, when granted selectively and monitored appropriately, frees resources for areas that demand active protection. Feedback loops reinforce alignment. Observe the outcomes of vigilance. Are interventions preventing loss, maintaining integrity, and supporting growth? Are resources being allocated effectively, or is caution diffuse and unproductive? Reflection allows adjustment, ensuring that strategic oversight remains adaptive, relevant, and productive. Misaligned caution can be corrected, while aligned caution strengthens both agency and influence. Purposeful caution also enables proactive action. By focusing attention where it matters, you anticipate risks, prepare for challenges, and engage strategically rather than reactively. Energy is not expended in endless speculation, but applied to tangible interventions that protect, support, and advance objectives. In this way, caution becomes a proactive instrument rather than a reactive burden. Boundaries, observation, and focus converge to create resilience. Environments that are complex, unpredictable, or rife with potential manipulation require energy to navigate safely. Purpose-driven caution ensures that this energy is applied effectively, preserving strength for meaningful engagement while reducing vulnerability. It transforms vigilance from a source of tension into a foundation of empowerment. Delegation and collaboration can further refine focus. When others demonstrate reliability and accountability, allow them to shoulder responsibility within defined parameters. Trust and oversight are balanced. Energy is not squandered micromanaging, yet outcomes remain safeguarded. Purposeful caution is not control for its own sake. It is a strategic allocation of attention to optimize results and preserve autonomy. Mindfulness reinforces alignment. Regular reflection on priorities, risks, and outcomes ensures that caution remains connected to purpose. Where attention is misdirected, adjustments can be made. Where vigilance is insufficient, focus can be increased. Awareness of alignment between energy and objective maintains effectiveness, strengthens decision-making, and reduces unnecessary stress. Ultimately, aligning caution with purpose is about freedom through discernment. It allows engagement without overexposure, vigilance without fatigue, and trust without naivety. Energy is applied strategically. Attention is directed toward what truly matters, and action is informed rather than impulsive. By connecting caution to purpose, you transform vigilance from a source of anxiety into a tool of empowerment and control. By the end of this practice, focus becomes precision, concern becomes strategy, and vigilance becomes an instrument of empowerment. Suspicion is no longer a blanket that blinds, but a lens that clarifies. Energy is conserved for meaningful action, and decisions are guided by both awareness and intention. In aligning caution with purpose, you navigate complex environments with clarity, resilience, and decisive authority, ensuring that your attention, effort, and influence are reserved for what truly deserves them. Chapter 10. Systems of Protection. Creating safeguards for relationships and resources. Protection is most effective when it is deliberate, structured, and consistent. In complex environments, relying solely on instinct, vigilance, or trust can leave critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. Systems of protection create frameworks that safeguard resources, relationships, and influence, transforming reactive defense into proactive strategy. These systems are not rigid. They are flexible architectures designed to preserve integrity, minimize risk, and maintain sovereignty over your life and priorities. The foundation of any protective system begins with clarity. You must understand what requires safeguarding: your time, energy, resources, relationships, and reputation. Define what is essential, what is non-negotiable, and what must remain within your control. This clarity informs the structure of protection, allowing resources to be allocated where they matter most and potential vulnerabilities to be anticipated. Without clarity, systems are reactive and inconsistent, leaving critical gaps exposed. Observation and documentation are vital. Patterns of behavior, inconsistencies, and previous breaches provide data that informs protective measures. By recording these insights, you create a reference point for decision-making, a system of accountability, and a historical guide to potential risks. Documentation is not about suspicion for its own sake. It is about awareness, preparation, and strategic response. Accurate records strengthen your ability to act decisively and consistently. Boundaries serve as structural pillars within protection systems. Clearly defined limits regarding time, energy, communication, and resources prevent exploitation and overextension. Boundaries reinforce authority, establish expectations, and create clear consequences for violations. When consistently enforced, they become self-sustaining components of protection, signaling to others that oversight is active and autonomy is maintained. Redundancy strengthens safeguards. Systems that rely on a single point of oversight or a single method of protection are vulnerable. Multiple layers, whether financial, operational, or relational, ensure that if one line fails, others remain intact. In relationships, for example, verifying commitments through observation, cross-checking information, or establishing backup measures can prevent reliance on a single source of trust. In resources, maintaining multiple security mechanisms, contingency plans, or oversight methods reduces vulnerability to unexpected breaches. Automation and structure play key roles. Rituals, protocols, and processes reduce reliance on memory or intuition alone. Consistent routines, whether in monitoring, evaluation, or communication, minimize human error and maintain vigilance even during periods of distraction or stress. Systems, once established, operate independently of emotion or fatigue, ensuring that safeguards remain operative without constant conscious effort. Risk assessment is continuous. Protective systems are not static. Environments evolve, relationships shift, and new threats emerge. Regularly evaluating potential risks, reassessing priorities, and adjusting measures ensures that protection remains effective and relevant. Flexibility is essential. A system must be resilient enough to adapt without compromising core integrity or boundaries. Strategic adaptation preserves both effectiveness and autonomy. Trust within a protective system is calibrated rather than absolute. While relationships, collaborators, or team members may be reliable, verification mechanisms ensure accountability. Trust is layered with oversight, observation, and procedural safeguards. This is not a lack of faith. It is an acknowledgement that vigilance ensures continuity, minimizes disruption, and protects against overexposure. Systems of protection combine confidence with contingency. Communication is integral to safeguarding. Clear, consistent, and purposeful dialogue reinforces expectations, confirms responsibilities, and provides transparency. Others understand their role within the protective framework, reducing misinterpretation and conflict. Communication also serves as a feedback mechanism, signaling when adjustments are necessary or when boundaries need reinforcement. The system is dynamic, and effective communication sustains its operation. Technology and tools can reinforce protective systems. While human observation is vital, technological safeguards, secure communication channels, monitoring mechanisms, or organizational tools enhance efficiency and reliability. Technology extends capacity, tracks patterns, and preserves records. When integrated thoughtfully, it amplifies vigilance without replacing the need for strategic awareness and discernment. Education and preparation underpin effectiveness. Understanding potential threats, human behavior, and environmental risks allows for preemptive structuring of safeguards. Knowledge enhances foresight, ensures measures are targeted, and strengthens decision-making. A well-informed individual can design a system that addresses specific vulnerabilities rather than relying on generic measures that may fail under pressure. Consistency and enforcement maintain credibility. Protective systems are only as strong as their execution. Inconsistent application of rules, boundaries, or protocols undermines authority, invites breaches, and erodes confidence. Consistency signals that safeguards are operative, that oversight is active, and that autonomy is non-negotiable. Over time, predictable enforcement strengthens influence and ensures sustainability. Psychological safeguards are equally important. Mental clarity, emotional regulation, and reflective awareness ensure that decisions within protective systems are informed, deliberate, and aligned with strategic objectives. Systems fail when decision-making is clouded by emotion, impulse, or fatigue. By integrating psychological vigilance into protection, oversight remains precise, measured, and effective even under pressure. Integration is the ultimate goal. Systems of protection should encompass relationships, resources, routines, and personal capacity. Each component reinforces the others, creating a cohesive framework that is resilient to manipulation, oversight failure, or unexpected disruption. Integrated systems provide both defense and freedom, enabling engagement without overexposure and safeguarding what is essential without limiting opportunity. The cost of neglecting systems is high. Unstructured reliance on trust, intuition, or goodwill leaves vulnerabilities unaddressed, energy overextended, and exposure unmanaged. Reactive responses in the absence of systems increase risk, heighten stress, and reduce capacity for strategic engagement. In contrast, deliberate systems provide structure, clarity, and authority, transforming vigilance into proactive empowerment. Ultimately, systems of protection are instruments of sovereignty. They preserve what matters most, ensure accountability, and allow engagement with confidence. Protection becomes a framework for action, rather than a reactive shield. Energy is preserved, boundaries are reinforced, and autonomy is maintained. Systems transform vulnerability into structure, risk into informed action, and potential exposure into deliberate control. By the conclusion of this process, safeguards are no longer optional or reactive. They are embedded into the architecture of life. Relationships, resources, and personal boundaries are fortified. Attention, energy, and influence are managed strategically. Systems of protection allow you to navigate complexity with authority, resilience, and foresight. They are the foundation upon which freedom, security, and deliberate engagement are built. Chapter 11. Shadows Integrated. Balancing awareness with connection. Awareness alone is not enough. Observing patterns, detecting risks, and establishing safeguards provide protection, but without integration, vigilance can become isolation. To navigate complex environments effectively, one must balance the shadows of caution with the light of meaningful connection. Integration is the art of harmonizing discernment with engagement, combining insight, strategy, and emotional clarity to act both safely and fully. The first step is acknowledging all aspects of experience. Shadows, the fears, doubts, and suspicions, exist for a reason. They signal vulnerability, highlight potential risks, and guide strategic attention. To deny them is to leave blind spots. To overemphasize them is to invite paranoia. Integration involves observing these shadows, understanding their origins, and allowing them to inform decisions without dominating action. Awareness transforms vulnerability into insight, creating a foundation for balanced interaction. Connection is equally essential. Isolation, even when protective, limits opportunity, growth, and influence. Humans operate within networks of relationships, collaboration, and interdependence. Engaging meaningfully while maintaining discernment requires deliberate choice, selecting whom to trust, how to invest energy, and when to step back. Connection does not negate caution, it amplifies it, providing context, insight, and mutual reinforcement. Integrated awareness ensures engagement is deliberate, informed, and protective. Boundaries remain central in this process. Integration does not eliminate limits, it situates them within a framework of relational awareness. Clear, enforced boundaries allow connection without overexposure, trust without naivety, and openness without compromise. Boundaries, when consciously maintained, allow participation in complex environments while preserving autonomy, energy, and resources. They serve as both shield and guide, balancing caution with engagement. Self-reflection is a critical tool for integration. Observing responses to trust, risk, and influence illuminates patterns in perception and behavior. Are judgments overly influenced by past betrayal? Are instincts reliably calibrated or skewed by anxiety? Are connections being avoided unnecessarily or cultivated strategically? Reflection allows recalibration, ensuring that insight informs action and that shadows serve awareness rather than fear. Patterns of human behavior offer valuable lessons. Recognition of recurring motives, tendencies, and strategies enables discernment without assumption. When integrated with emotional clarity, observation, and strategic boundaries, pattern recognition allows informed engagement with others. It equips you to act decisively, to trust selectively, and to anticipate risk without succumbing to paralysis. Awareness becomes practical, actionable, and empowering. Vulnerability is part of integration. Absolute invulnerability isolates. It denies the depth, richness, and opportunity of authentic engagement. Selective vulnerability, shared deliberately within safe parameters, fosters connection, collaboration, and influence. It requires trust tempered with observation, openness framed by boundaries, and presence informed by insight. Integration is the space where vulnerability and strength coexist harmoniously, enhancing relationships and decision-making alike. Emotional mastery amplifies integration. Suspicion, fear, or defensiveness can cloud perception and disrupt engagement. By regulating emotional responses, you maintain clarity, act deliberately, and navigate relationships strategically. Emotional awareness ensures that connections are not reactive or overextended, that caution is proportionate to risk, and that decisions preserve both integrity and influence. Integration requires alignment between internal state and external action. Strategic alliances become more effective with an integrated awareness. Partnerships, collaborations, and networks thrive when each participant's intentions, boundaries, and reliability are understood. Integration allows recognition of genuine alignment versus opportunistic alignment. It provides a framework for engagement that maximizes benefit while minimizing exposure, ensuring that relationships strengthen agency rather than diminish it. Observation, reflection, and adjustment are ongoing. Integration is not static. Environments change, behaviors evolve, and priorities shift. Continuous assessment ensures that awareness remains aligned with context, that boundaries remain relevant, and that engagement remains purposeful. Flexibility within structure allows adaptation without compromising sovereignty or emotional clarity. The shadows guide but do not dictate. The light illuminates but does not blind. Accountability enhances integration. Acting with deliberate intention, enforcing boundaries consistently, and monitoring outcomes reinforces credibility, autonomy, and resilience. Accountability is both internal, self-discipline, reflection, and recalibration, and external clarity and expectations, enforcement of limits, and responsiveness to patterns of behavior. Integrated awareness ensures that responsibility is distributed thoughtfully, preserving influence and protecting against exploitation. Trust, when integrated, is deliberate and selective. It is not naivety or assumption, but a conscious decision informed by observation, patterns, and history. Selective trust allows engagement to flourish, influence to expand, and relationships to deepen without unnecessary risk. Integrated trust balances generosity with caution, openness with discernment, and engagement with autonomy. The culmination of integration is freedom. By harmonizing awareness, vigilance, boundaries, and connection, you navigate environments with authority, clarity, and confidence. Energy is applied strategically, decisions are deliberate, and engagement is meaningful. Shadows no longer paralyze, they inform. Connection no longer exposes unnecessarily, it enriches. Integration transforms vigilance from burden into tool, and engagement from risk into opportunity. At the highest level, Shadows integrated means acting from a position of informed empowerment. You operate with knowledge of patterns, awareness of risk, and emotional clarity. You maintain boundaries while engaging fully, trust selectively, and invest energy deliberately. You recognize that autonomy and connection are not opposing forces, but complementary dimensions of strategic living. Integration creates balance, allowing participation, protection, and influence to coexist in harmony. By the end of this process, vigilance becomes wisdom, boundaries become enablers rather than limitations, and engagement becomes deliberate rather than reactive. Awareness illuminates patterns without constraining action, and connection enriches without compromising sovereignty. Shadows are no longer feared or suppressed. They are recognized, understood, and harnessed as guides for intentional living. Integrated awareness provides both protection and freedom, ensuring that you act with clarity, authority, and purposeful engagement in every aspect of life. Chapter 12. Sovereign Trust. Living with discernment, strength, and freedom. Trust is the final frontier of personal sovereignty. After navigating suspicion, establishing boundaries, reclaiming power, and integrating awareness with connection, you arrive at a state where trust is no longer blind, reactive, or naive. Sovereign trust is deliberate, measured, and unshakable, not in rigidity but in discernment. It is a conscious choice to engage fully while maintaining clarity, strength, and freedom over your own life and resources. The first aspect of sovereign trust is discernment. You recognize the difference between reliable intentions and superficial appearances, between patterns that signal consistency and those that hint at potential betrayal. Observation, experience, and emotional clarity converge to form judgment that is precise and informed. Discernment allows trust to be extended strategically, ensuring that energy, influence, and resources are allocated wisely rather than squandered on chance. Strength accompanies discernment. Sovereign trust requires courage, the courage to say no, to withdraw, or to enforce boundaries when necessary. It is the internal fortitude that allows engagement without overexposure, commitment without compromise, and generosity without vulnerability to exploitation. Strength ensures that trust is neither reckless nor hesitant. It is balanced, intentional, and resilient. Freedom is the natural result. When trust is sovereign, decisions are self-directed, actions are deliberate, and relationships are engaged from a place of agency rather than obligation. Freedom is not a state of isolation. It is the liberation to interact fully, contribute meaningfully, and protect what is essential without fear of manipulation or loss. It is the manifestation of autonomy in its most confident and controlled form. Sovereign trust also integrates boundaries, observation, and systems of protection. Boundaries define the framework within which engagement occurs safely. Vigilance ensures consistency, patterns are monitored, and anomalies are assessed. Systems of protection maintain accountability and safeguard resources. In combination, these elements transform trust from vulnerability into strategy, allowing it to operate as a tool of empowerment, rather than a liability. Emotional intelligence is central. Sovereign trust requires awareness of one's own responses, triggers, and vulnerabilities. By managing emotional reactions, clarity is preserved, judgment is sharpened, and engagement remains deliberate. Emotional mastery ensures that trust is granted based on reason and observation rather than impulse, attachment, or fear. It prevents exploitation while fostering genuine connection. Accountability reinforces trust. Trust extended without checks or awareness is fragile. In sovereign trust, accountability mechanisms, whether through agreements, verification, or mutual expectation, ensure that commitments are honored and actions are consistent with intent. Accountability strengthens reliability, reduces risk, and solidifies the integrity of relationships, resources, and collaborations. Patterns guide action. Through experience, observation, and reflection, you learn to recognize behavior, intentions, and tendencies. Repeated reliability and alignment with values inform where trust can be granted confidently. Conversely, inconsistencies, breaches, or manipulative behavior signal where caution is necessary. Patterns transform perception into insight, allowing trust to be both expansive and protected. Sovereign trust requires selective generosity. Engagement, openness, and contribution are not withheld out of fear but offered purposefully. You invest where alignment, integrity, and mutual benefit exist, and you refrain where risk outweighs value. Generosity is deliberate, reinforcing connections while protecting personal sovereignty. Trust becomes a conscious instrument, not a blind surrender. Integration of lessons learned is essential. Experiences of betrayal, overexposure, or misjudgment inform current engagement. Reflecting on past outcomes strengthens discernment, hones judgment, and reduces susceptibility to repetition of error. Sovereign trust is built upon the foundation of experience, transformed into actionable insight that guides future choices. Freedom within trust is sustained through ongoing vigilance. Awareness is not abandoned, it is calibrated. Systems, boundaries, and observation remain active, ensuring that engagement continues to align with priorities, values, and safety. Sovereign trust is dynamic. It allows openness while preserving protection, connection while preserving autonomy, and generosity while preserving control. Reclaiming agency is the culmination. Trust is no longer something seeded unconsciously, manipulated, or assumed. It becomes a choice exercised with authority. You decide who, what, and where deserves confidence, and you engage fully within those parameters. In this state, relationships, resources, and personal energy are preserved and strengthened, allowing influence, impact, and presence to flourish. Sovereign trust also nurtures resilience. By extending trust strategically, observing behavior, and enforcing boundaries, you reduce the likelihood of betrayal and loss. When challenges arise, they are met with prepared, informed, and decisive response rather than reactive vulnerability. Resilience grows from the combination of discernment, strength, and deliberate engagement. Ultimately, sovereign trust is empowerment manifested. It allows engagement without compromise, openness without overexposure, and generosity without loss of autonomy. It harmonizes caution with action, vigilance with connection, and protection with opportunity. Those who operate with sovereign trust navigate life with authority, clarity, and freedom, creating a secure foundation for growth, influence, and meaningful relationships. By the end of this journey, trust is no longer a source of anxiety or risk. It is a deliberate, strategic choice. You engage fully, act decisively, and allocate attention and resources with precision. Boundaries, observation, and systems of protection are fully integrated, reinforcing sovereignty and resilience. Trust becomes an instrument of freedom, a conduit for authentic connection, and a reflection of personal authority. Sovereign trust is not given lightly, but when extended, it is unwavering. It is confidence grounded in discernment, fortified by strength, and guided by clarity. It allows life to be navigated with purpose, relationships to be engaged with integrity, and personal agency to remain intact. Through sovereign trust, vigilance becomes wisdom, connection becomes meaningful, and freedom becomes tangible, a living expression of empowered, deliberate, and secure existence.